Hello everybody, welcome back to Alan Wall's Photography. This is Alan and today we are going to slab. So in macro photography, slabbing is actually a thing. And I'm going to tell you everything you ever wanted to know about slabbing and then show you how to use it, if that sounds reasonable. Stick around till the end of the video if you would like to participate on Discord. We have a forum there now, and I'll explain to you at the end of the video how you can jump on board if you're interested. In a nutshell, what slabbing is a different kind of focus stacking. Instead of focus stacking 180 images all at once into one enormous stack with one output. Instead, what we do is we split the stack up into bite-sized chunks and we run a stacking program on each of those chunks. Then we take the outputs from however many of these we have and we stack them separately. The reason we use it is it allows us to overcome some of the really perplexing problems that you have when you stack very large stacks, particularly stacks where you have body parts hanging over other body parts, so that you get all kinds of problems with transparency of the closer in objects and out of focus areas encroaching on parts of the image. If you've ever seen an unsuccessful focus stack that was a very large, deep stack and a very complicated subject, then you have seen the reason that we slab. So slabbing is not an alternative to good photographic technique, not by any means. And something else about slabbing that's unusual is you never really know what kind of results you're going to get. I so often will look at a stack of photographs and think, well, I'm not even going to bother running a regular stack on that because that's going to have to be slabbed. Only to discover that the regular stack looked fantastic and the slabbed stack looked terrible, and vice versa. So it's a powerful tool to have at the ready, but it's probably a bit risky to assume you know when you're going to need it. I'll tell you the way I use slabbing, because it is relatively quick and easy to stack a large number of photographs. If you have a routine that allows you to do other stuff while the slow bits are going on, which I do, it's no problem for me to run a PMax and a DMAP run on my images and see what I get. Sometimes I will even run 2 or even 3 DMAP runs with different settings to see if I can improve the picture. But what I won't do is get into retouching if I don't have a reasonably good starting place. I don't want to spend 10 hours retouching a single photograph because neither my PMax or DMAP outputs are a good starting place. So if I end up in that situation, I'll almost always try to slab it and see if I can get a better result. There are 2 different ways in which slabbing can save a big stack. The first is just by performing the slabbing routine, you can end up with a better output than you did by running a DMAP or a PMax independently. So that's the first way. The second way, which is in my opinion probably even more important, is when you slab, when you run that routine and you end up with, instead of 200 images, you end up with 20 slabs going into one image, retouching becomes much, much easier, faster. And in some respects, it takes care of a lot of the problems that we see. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of transparent foregrounds in focus stacking. It's when you have a limb or a wing or something. Well, not a wing because they are transparent. You end up with a solid body part that's in front of something else, yet you can see everything behind the solid body part. I won't get into the optics of why that happens, but it is a very, very common issue. And one of the ways we would fix that would be to run a single short stack of that solid body part, and then use that as a source file to retouch the bigger stack that we've done. And that's pretty much what slabbing is, except instead of just taking one selectively stacked body part, we're selectively stacking the whole thing. So it means when we run into things like partial transparency of an antenna or something like that, it's not that difficult to simply paint the details back in. The reason this video came about was I was asked by 3 people in a row to do a video on the software program Bug Slabber. It was a third-party plugin that used to work great with Zerene Stacker. It would write the computer code for you so that you could tell Zerene how to run your stack. But when the operating system of Mac computers upgraded to, I think, Catalina, I think that was when it happened, when they went to 64-bit programs only, Bug Slabber and Slabber Jockey both, I think, were 32-bit programs, and they haven't been updated, which means now if you have a Mac, you cannot use any of those add-ons to do your slabbing. I actually spoke to the owner of Bug Slabber, a very interesting conversation, and learned that he wasn't planning on updating this software. So Bug Slabber is no more, as it won't run on 64-bit computers. But I got in touch with Rik Littlefield, the guy that invented and owns Zerene Stacker. Super nice guy, by the way. And he told me that the new Zerene Stacker beta that I had just downloaded actually contains a built-in slabbing program, which is absolutely fantastic. So it's all fixed. Slabbing is something that I don't think the other focus stacking program is capable of doing. That may no longer be the case. They may have come up with a workaround for it. The issue is one of alignment. The way that Zerene aligns photographs, it actually attaches information to the photographs. As long as they're part of a Zerene program, the alignment data is kept with the photograph. So you can move outputs into storage and then bring them back into Zerene, and they're already aligned. If you don't have that, it creates a terrible mess and the slabbing doesn't work. So that's why I think it's this is just the Zerene thing. But yeah, I don't know why you'd be on any other platform anyway. So before I take you into the process of running a slab, let me very briefly sum up my usual workflow, because this will be an opportunity for me to answer a couple of questions I've had recently. Normally, what I will do is I'll look at my stack of photographs for this particular subject. In Lightroom is where I keep all my photographs, so that's where I start. And what I'll do is I'll select the entire range of photographs, and then I will start at the beginning and go through to the end, and I will remove any photographs that don't have anything in focus at the beginning or at the end, because sometimes I'll go a little bit over in both directions, and you want to get rid of those photographs. The other thing I'll do is make absolutely sure nothing catastrophic happened halfway through, like the insect's head fell off or it's happened. So I'll scan through all the images, make sure everything is fine, there's no movement. And when I'm ready, I will export all of the images from Lightroom directly into Zerene. Zerene has a plugin that works with Lightroom, so it's seamless. What I do next is I run both of the algorithms that Zerene offers, both the PMax algorithm, which I do first, and the DMAP. The first is a pyramid program. Its weaknesses are that it tends to accumulate noise in the dark areas of the photograph, which is why it's not alone a good stacking tool. Well, it is a great stacking tool, but not by itself. DMAP, on the other hand, is a depth map which results in beautiful colors and detail, but it doesn't give you the clarity you get around the edges from the pyramid algorithm. So I run them both, usually planning to start with whichever image looks closer to what I want my finished image to look like. By that I mean I've got two outputs, a DMAP and a PMax. Usually the PMax has all of the sharp edges that I want, but the DMAP has all of the color and the internal detail and the texture. And I want both. So what I will do is I'll pick the one that looks, sometimes the PMax looks better and it just needs a little bit of color and texture. So I'll start with a PMax and then I'll clone in the parts that I want from the DMAP. But that's pretty unusual. I almost always start with the DMAP, mainly because it's usually a prettier picture and there is less I need to do to add the details from PMax. So that's what I'll do. Sometimes I'll run DMAP a second time with different settings. Maybe I'll lower the estimation radius. If there's a tremendous amount of sharp detail in the image, then I might do that. If there's less, I might take it in the other direction. But usually I just leave the default settings for how the DMAP is run. But if you've ever run a focus stacking program in Zerene, you know that halfway through the depth map algorithm, the program pauses and it asks you to set your threshold for the contrast. Basically, that's where you tell Zerene, pay attention to this stuff, ignore this stuff, usually the outside stuff. And if I set it to one setting, say 40% the first time, I may set it to 70% the second time, just to try to pick up more detail at the edges. And again, the results are often surprising, but the more outputs that I have, the more inputs for retouching that I have, the more opportunities I have to make the changes that I want. Okay? I hope that kind of sums up the way I normally roll. Retouching is a whole separate subject, and because it is so critical to slabbing, I'm going to cover that when we get into the program itself. So what I'm going to do now is I'll record my screen and I'll take you through the process of running the slab. Then I won't be able to record my screen. My computer tells me I can do one of two things. I can retouch in Zerene, or I can record my screen. It won't do both. So I'll have to film it. I hope that's okay. All right, let's get started. Our specimen today is weird. I think it's an ichneumon wasp. I don't know. Somebody's going to have to tell me. It's got massively long antennas and a massively long ovipositor coming out of its bottom and a long skinny waist. And it's just bizarre looking, but I caught it in my net the other day, and thought I'd photograph it. And it's the perfect slabbing specimen. I'm hoping. You never know till you get there. But it is so long. It has so many overlapping and crossing pieces. I think it'll be fun to slab. So let's get in there and see what we can do. So here we are in Lightroom, and these are my photographs. I've got 137 in this stack. That is one thing that you'll find. You seldom need to slab with shorter stacks. In fact, it doesn't really offer any real advantage. It's particularly useful when you have deep stacks, and this is a medium-sized one. I've already checked through all the images. I don't see any change in movement or position, so I think we're good to go. I've done a little bit of pre-editing. It really helps to get a nice bright image whenever you focus stack, because, as I said, the first algorithm, the PMAX algorithm, tends to accumulate darks, and we've got some really dark areas on this guy. So the reason I have him positioned off to one side is I wanted to get as much of his antenna as possible. So anyhow, let's export these to Zerene Stacker. Unfortunately, this takes a good long time, so when it's finished, I'll come back. Well, that was actually fairly quick. We have all 137 images now in Zerene. As I said before, I like to start out aligning and stacking both. But let me make a suggestion. If you're planning on following along with me and doing this, and you have Zerene, of course, go to Options, Preferences, and under Pre-Processing, make sure that you have checked Add Files to Existing Project as already aligned. If you don't do this at some point before you try to do the slabbing, you're going to end up having to realign all your images, and it makes a big mess and takes a long time. So check this box before you go. We're going to be changing some other settings too, but we'll do them as we get to them. So, okay, and let's go ahead and start these stacking. This also is going to take a good little while, but when we're halfway through the DMAP, I'll bring you back and show you how I set my contrast threshold. The PMAX algorithm is finished, and the DMAP is very close to the end of the first part of the run. During this stack, I couldn't help noticing that one of the photographs, I didn't catch note of which one it was, had a different lighting appearance. It looked as if one of the flashes might not have fired or didn't fire at full power. And that's what this banding is up here. Very irritating. I didn't see that as I was thumbing through them. There's only a couple more here need to be stacked, and then we'll have our preliminary output for the DMAP, and we need to set our contrast threshold. Like I said, that's just so Zerene knows what to pay attention to and what to ignore. It probably has a button where it'll ignore me. Okay, so right now, if we left it down here at 33%, the program would work hard to resolve detail in the background, which we wouldn't want. That would just make all of this banding even worse. But you'll notice that we already have areas of the bug that are going to be excluded from the computations, which is a bit problematic. This is exactly the kind of circumstance where I might run the DMAP twice. Let me set the threshold where I would normally as far as the background goes, somewhere around there, but there is a tremendous amount that's not going to be processed in the image itself. Well, let's run this one like So at 73%, we'll see what we get. And I may run it a second time at a lower setting to try to resolve some of the detail in here. We'll end up then with a horrible background, but we can retouch that out. So this is going to take another 10 minutes, so I'll be back as soon as it's done. So as this first run of the DMAP finishes up, you can start to see a lot of the problems that an image like this can give. There's an enormous amount of foreground invisibility, or transparency, I should say. All of these areas that didn't get filled in, these were the areas that were black that I had to sacrifice in order to take care of the background. So at the very least, I'm going to try, I think, at least one more DMAP run with a much lower contrast threshold, see if that brings any of the limbs back. But I would already be looking at this and thinking, this needs to be slabbed. That would be my intuition, probably before I brought it over from Lightroom, but looking at the DMAP now, definitely. I think just for completeness sake, let's have a look at the Pmax real quick. Okay, well, there may be enough to pull over to create a whole photograph, but probably not. See these areas of foreground transparency where the entire wing is showing through the whole thing here? This is a textbook example of a stack that needs to be slabbed. I will go ahead and run one more DMAP stack, and I'll be back with you when we get halfway through, and I'll show you what I do with the contrast threshold. So here we are drawing to the midpoint of the next DMAP run, and what I'm going to do here is take the contrast threshold back down. Now I know that in doing so, we're going to really mess up the already messed up background, but it at least will give me a chance to salvage some of the negative space in the foreground elements. We'll see. I don't have high hopes that it'll make much difference, but it's worth a try. Just about 2 more images to go, and we'll see. You can never have too many potential input images for your retouching. This is something that I will do in a heartbeat. I'll go back and maybe do a selective stack where I just select the forelimbs and select all of the images of the forelimbs and run an individual stack like that. This, however, would be a bit too much. So what I'm doing now is dropping the contrast threshold until the detail in these areas comes back, which is basically to 0. Let's run it at 0. I don't think it's going to help. We'll give it a try. Now the program is going to examine every pixel in the image and stack it. So we'll end up probably with something pretty horrible. I'll be back as soon as it's done. Well, maybe not surprisingly, this is the output from the second DMAP. There is nothing of use in this, so I think we have no option but to run this through a slabbing program. So that's kind of good, because that's what we're doing the video about. If this had come out perfect, I'd have just given up, I suppose. Anyway, in order to set up a slab run, what we need to do is, first of all, make sure that our settings are correct. If you go to Options, Preferences, and just double check, like I mentioned earlier, that you have the Add Files to Existing Project as already aligned. So important that you do that. Go to the Batch menu and go to slabbing. This is brand new in the beta. If your Zerene doesn't have this, you need to download the recently released beta version and it'll be in there. Now, the number of frames per slab that you use is largely going to be determined on what kind of lens you are using, how much magnification you have, how thick you need each slab to be. If you have a truly massive stack of images and you take 10 frames per slab, that might not be enough to give you much more of an advantage than just stacking individually. So what you need to have for each slab, you need to have enough depth of field to be able to focus on an anatomical part. You'll see what I mean. We're going to leave it on the default of 10 and 3. 30% overlap is about the minimum that I'll go to, but this is going to be a pretty big process, so we'll leave it at 10 and with an overlap of 3. Now, you can stack in either direction. You can go Pmax for the initial slabs and then stack those slabs in DMAP, which is what I'll probably do now. Though you can do it the other way around. I change my output settings so that I know where the images are going and that they are going into a folder not on my hard drive, because these can be massive. So I pick save as source name in designated folder, and then I am going to choose a different folder. So we're going to save my outputs in there, and it's showing up correctly. All right, 10 frames per slab, 3 frames overlapping before and after. I'm going to stack in Pmax, and I'm going to save as source name in the designated folder, which is on an outboard drive. Good. When I click OK, it'll take us to the batch queue. Now, this is where you can add other things. You can tell Zerene to do a whole night's work by putting jobs in here, and it will do them all night long without bothering you. But the only thing I'm going to change is save in designated folder as source name, what I just did on the slabbing menu. I think this is exactly the same instruction, but I do this every time so that I double check that it's going to the same place, if that makes any sense. There we go. So now I know it's going to go to the right place. These are the instructions. You can see all of the stacks that we've told it to make. This is the queued batch. So once you've double checked where your files are going, hit run all batches. And you can then close this dialog. You don't need that anymore for now. And what it's going to do, it's going to batch 10 of these input images together, and then it's going to run a Pmax stack on them. The reason I had you go into your options and make sure that you are going to import images as aligned is going to be when we take these images and bring them back in as inputs. If that checkbox wasn't checked, it would have to realign everything at that point, which you want to avoid. All right, so I'm guessing we've got about 17 to 20 stacks to run. So I'll just let it go do its thing, and I'll see you back here as we get towards the end. So the batch execution is all done. All of our stacks are finished. Now what we need to do is bring them back in as inputs. Now, it's really important that you don't get rid of your original images, because you may still end up wanting to use one or more of them. But what the program will do is add them on the bottom. So go to File, Add Files, select all of them, and then open them, and it'll move them right over into Zerene Stacker as inputs. So the next stage, once we have all these new inputs, is we need to stack them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's my preference, at least at first, to stack them in the depth map algorithm. It usually gives a good result in images like this, but let's see what it does. So once we have all of the inputs selected, go to Stack, Stack Selected, DMAP. Now this is a surprisingly fast process. Unlike getting to this point, it really rips through the images very quickly. And it'll create a new output image on the right. And just like when we're stacking any DMAP stack of images, we're going to have to set the contrast threshold when we get to the halfway point. Now remember, what it's doing is stacking together not individual photographs, but stacking together completed stacks. So hopefully we'll see an improvement in the foreground transparency. All right. We may need to do this twice as well. For the first one, let's try to get as much of that surround taken care of as possible, and then we'll come back and see what we need to do. Now, like I said, the output from running the slab isn't necessarily the end of the road, even if the output isn't much better than the original DMAP and PMAX outputs. It's the power that it gives us for retouching that often saves the day. But let's see what we get here. A lot of missing areas. This really is a challenging image to stack. All right, so that's the final output. So I think what we need to do is take a look at the individual stacks and see if we have enough information to retouch without doing anything else. That first stack's not very useful. The abdomen's pretty good anyway, so. All right, so we're seeing this rear limb. Most of it's covered, so I think we're going to be okay. We can certainly retouch that area in. Let's keep going down. So what I'm doing is I look at each of these individual stacks. I'm looking over at the image and seeing if we have enough information to use as an input for retouching. And it doesn't look too bad so far. We'll go a little bit faster here. So as we see each of these stacked images coming up, what we're trying to decide is there enough source material here to fill in the blanks over here? And so far it looks pretty promising. This is all in focus here, so we'll be good on this leg. Even better, there's the end of it. There's the rest of this limb. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So what I'm going to do is start retouching, and the next decision we need to make is which image do we want to use as the basis for our retouching. Let's refresh our memory. What do we have? We have the original PMAX, which actually might not be a bad choice. There's probably too much noise in the dark areas. Let's look at the others. Well, we're not going to use that. That'll take too much work. That's even worse. which means that our DMAP, our final DMAP of the slab run is probably what I want to use. It certainly has preserved a lot of detail in the antennas and the head and the abdomen. We just got to fix these limbs. So with the output image, the depth map stacked image selected, go to edit and start retouching just like you normally would. Then our retouched image will show up on the right, and the image that we're stacking from will show up on the left. Now, as a general rule, I find it easier to minimize, or actually to close, the input image so that I can fill the screen with the output image. And by hitting the S key, it'll flash us back and forward between the input image that we have selected and the output image as we build it. This is just easier for me without having to look back and forth between the two. Now, this is the problem I was telling you about. My computer will not let me retouch and record the screen. So what I'm going to do is shut down the screen recording and then start filming the screen with an outside camera. So bear with me. Okay, well, I hope you're going to be able to see this. The retouching proceeds exactly the same way it does if you're retouching from individual images, exactly the same if you're using an entire stack. I go through each of these slabs one at a time so that I don't miss anything. I'll select the next stack and then I'll look to see where I might need it. Now, I don't necessarily do all the retouching at this point, and this is where you need to be very mindful of what is in front of what. So how much of this wing is actually going to appear in the final image. So what you want to do is, when you hold down the S key and you look at your image, you probably want to zoom in a little bit to that area. And what you're looking for is parts of the slab that are in good focus where you're going to want them to be. And really the only thing is this wing, and we appear to already have most of it. Maybe this slightly out of focus part. Now, there's something I want to mention to you here that's really useful, is that the new Zerene Stacker comes with additional brushes which are incredibly useful and worth mentioning. The usual brush is the details brush, and this is an amazing piece of engineering, because this brush has adaptive hardness. It acts kind of like the clone stamp tool, but when you bring a selection from the other photograph into this photograph, it will give you a very hard edge where it needs it, and it'll give you a very soft edge where that's needed. So it's a very useful way to retouch. The other brushes that I really enjoy using and are very handy, the pixels one simply copies the pixels, just like a clone stamp, from the source image to the destination. And the ones I enjoy using the most are the lighten and darken. These will copy material from your source image, and they will paste it or paint it onto your target image, but only, in the case of darken, only if it will darken areas of the photograph. So it won't copy anything that is going to result in a lighter photograph. Let's zoom back out and see if there's anything else in this source image that we need. That's out of focus, so we don't need it. The rest of the abdomen looks fine. Yeah, the parts that are in focus are already selected in the image, so we're good there. Let's just move on through. There's really not much in these first few slices. You don't want to watch me edit this entire thing. So what I'm going to do is jump to a later stack where I know there's going to be information that we want to move over. This is getting close, but it's not in focus. There's never any point actually moving over out of focus areas because you're just going to have to do them again. So the only things really in focus are some of these hairs down here, and they're already well represented. So let's skip forward a couple of slices. All right, now we've got plenty of stuff. Now you can see down here where there's a hole in the destination image. We don't really want to move that because it's actually not in focus. It's just this top part that is. This is definitely an area that we could do some work. So I am going to use the regular default details brush here and just paint in the in focus parts from my source image, like so. I don't need to darken or lighten brush here. Actually, I'll use the darken brush on this edge because what that will do, it will paint those hairs in, but it won't mess with that blue until I know what that actually is. If I wanted to paint these bristles in, I would use the lighten brush because I don't want to affect any of the light areas, but I do want the bristles to show up. All right, so let me finish painting this in. I tend to jump from brush to brush continuously during this process. Whichever one I'm painting this in, I hope it is in fact, oh, it's not the front limb, is it? This is the frontmost, this is the middle limb, so it is in front of that one. Okay, that's good. This is a laborious process, as if you've ever done any Zerene retouching, you know it just takes patience. You can't rush it. But what I am going to do, I'm going to go over this entire output image one slice at a time. I'll bring you back in when I'm about halfway through, because this could easily take 2 hours to finish, and I know you don't want to watch that. Let me show you a trick here. I painted most of this leg back in. It's not all in focus, so I'll be definitely going over parts of it again, but it's filled in most of this hollow leg. But see the bristles on the edge? I definitely want those bristles to show through, but I don't want to remove any of the detail behind there, because you would see that detail. That's when I'd use the lighten brush, and I would use a small brush, and I would just paint those hairs back in, just like so. Slowly but surely, starting to get all the pieces in the right order. This is a particularly tricky stack to do because of the wings and legs and everything, all higgledy-piggledy in here. But so I'm constantly going and checking what my source layer looks like and looking for, I kind of pull up the source image and then check the areas that are in focus, compare them to what I have in the building final image, always being mindful of things that are crossing. Here's another interesting point. If you look at this area, The photograph I have in the stack that I'm using has most of this leg almost in focus, but in order to not disrupt the work I've already done, I can paint out the blue that's showing through by using the darken brush. But when I get down to here, the part that I want to paint over is darker. I'd be better off there using the lighten brush and paint in what's underneath there without disturbing any of the dark areas, like so. All right, well, I've about reached a stopping point now. There is no doubt that the image is better than it was when we started. We have all the limbs, no hollow spaces. There's a strange pink cast, and a lot of this type of stuff I won't even try to remove in Zerene. I mean, there is definitely a trip to Photoshop coming up, because a lot of this stuff will be very easy to remove in Photoshop, but it's a bit of a challenge to mess around with here. I think that I've got all of the limbs in the right order and everything in sharp focus. And if I don't, I can always clone little bits here or there to clean up any leftovers. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to accept, I think this is our retouched image. I'm just going to go to File. Whoops, I've got to commit my retouching first. So I go to Edit, Commit Retouching. That will create a new output file right here. And I will save my output image somewhere. Okay, now I'm not going to save the whole project, because I do not want to do this again anytime soon. So I am going to close the project. Do I really want to? Yes, I do. And close Zerene Stacker. And that's really all we have to do. So to sum up, what is slabbing? It's an alternative way of focus stacking. It's no more complicated than stacking 200 regular photographs. It's just one extra step. The trick is to use it wisely. Use it when you actually need it. Use it when it's going to make a difference. Remember that there's an awful lot of sin that you can set right in Photoshop if you're careful and you learn the tricks. So this kind of focus stacking is super time consuming once you get into the retouching, but it's a good tool to have in your toolbox. And don't forget that slabbing doesn't necessarily fix the photograph. Sometimes it's the retouching after slabbing that gets you most of the way there, like it did in this example. All of the initial results were terrible, but the outcome's not bad. And it's only because we were able to retouch using those individual sub-stacks. I certainly encourage you to give it a try. If you have Zerene Stacker, certainly get familiar with the program so that you can use this on those rare occasions when you're going to need it. So that's all I have for you on this particular subject, but there was one thing I wanted to tell you about, which is our new Discord, what would you call it? A forum. It's a place where we can hang out and talk to one another, share ideas, share photographs, pretty much anything you want. It's up and running. We've already got a couple of volunteer moderators working, which is good because I don't have a whole lot of time to get on there, though I try to get on there every day. If you want to be part of it, there are a few ways that you can do that. One is go to my website, www.alanwallsphotography.com, and check the box that asks you if you want to get the newsletter. Don't worry, you won't get a newsletter. Nobody does. No, I've only sent out two newsletters. They're too time consuming. If I did newsletters all the time, I wouldn't get any videos made. So yeah, if you sign up for it though, I'll know you're not a malicious robot. I have been warned to keep robots off my Discord. It sounded like really good advice to me, though what a robot would be doing on my Discord, I don't know. But anyway, if you sign up for the newsletter, I'll know you're a real person and I will send you an invitation to join Discord. The other way you can do it, which is far superior, is to become a patron of mine on Patreon. If you do that, I'll come over to your house and hand you the invitation to Discord, figuratively speaking. This was going to be a fairly quick and straightforward video, and it turned into a monster because I've been stacking and editing all day long to find a photograph that would work for this. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. It's good to see you again. I'll see many of you over on Discord. Otherwise, I'll be back in a few days. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you want to be a patron of mine, please go to Patreon. I'll put the thing right there so that you can. And that's it. Enjoy the beginning of the summer. Stay safe, and I will see you soon. Bon voyage. That's not right, is it? Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye.